You ever look back at a moment in your life and wonder how you missed all the signs? That was me, living my so-called perfect life in the suburbs. I had a beautiful wife, Amelia, a woman I thought I'd grow old with, and my daughter Lily, my pride and joy. Life was supposed to be simple. Work a 9 to 5, come home to my family, and enjoy the little moments. But the thing about little moments is that sometimes they're just distractions from what's really going on underneath. And looking back now, I realize I was blind as hell. It all started about 8 months ago. Amelia began acting different. I can't really explain it at first. It was just this gut feeling that something was off. She was working late more often, taking these business trips that seemed to pop up out of nowhere, and she barely looked me in the eye when I asked about her day. The excuses were always the same. "It's just work, John. I'm doing this for us," she'd say, brushing me off like I was being paranoid. And like a fool, I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But as the weeks turned into months, the distance between us grew wider. The bedroom? Don't even get me started. We went from having sex a couple of times a week to once every 2 months, if I was lucky. And when we did, it felt cold, like she was just going through the motions, almost annoyed that she had to do it. I remember one night, I tried to initiate, and she just rolled over and said, "Not tonight, I'm tired." The thing is, she was tired a lot, but somehow never too tired to dress up, put on perfume, and work late. It wasn't just me who noticed the change, Lily did too. She's 13, and we've always been close, but she started clinging to me more. I could see it in her eyes. She knew something was off, but being a kid, she didn't know how to process it. Her relationship with Amelia was never great to begin with. My wife could be harsh on her, always criticizing her grades, telling her what to wear, and trying to control who she hung out with. "You're not going out dressed like that," Amelia would bark whenever Lily would try on something a bit trendy. It wasn't discipline, it was like she was constantly trying to find flaws in her own kid, nitpicking everything. One Friday afternoon, everything changed. Lily came home from school early. Some teacher had a family emergency, and classes got canceled. I was still at work, so she just let herself in like she usually did. But that day was different. Later that evening, she looked pale, like she'd seen a ghost. At first, I thought she was sick or something, but she kept giving me this look like she was afraid to say something. Finally, after dinner, when Amelia left the room, Lily broke down in tears and blurted it all out. "Dad, I saw Mom with Mr. Bennett," she whispered, shaking. At first, I had no idea what she meant. "What do you mean, honey? What about Mr. Bennett?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "I saw them kissing," Lily continued, her voice barely a whisper. "In his classroom. They were really close, and they didn't even see me walk by." I remember just sitting there, feeling like someone had just punched me in the gut. Mr. Bennett. The name alone made me sick. He was Lily's history teacher, this mid-40s wannabe intellectual with his tweed jackets and smug little grin. The kind of guy who probably thinks he's better than everyone else just because he reads poetry and quotes philosophy like he's in some kind of 19th century novel. For a second, I wanted to believe Lily was mistaken. Maybe she saw something out of context. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But deep down, something told me she was right. I mean, why would she make this up? And as much as I didn't want to believe it, suddenly all those late nights and Amelia's work trips started to make sense. I just sat there in silence, trying to wrap my head around what my own daughter had just told me. "Are you sure?" I asked, grasping at straws. "Are you absolutely sure that's what you saw?" "I'm sure, Dad," she said, tears rolling down her cheeks. I wish I wasn't. Amelia came back into the room just then, all smiles like nothing was wrong, and I couldn't even look at her. I felt sick, like the world was spinning too fast. I mumbled something about needing to go to the garage and practically ran out of the room. I sat there in my damn garage, staring at my toolbox, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wanted to go back inside, grab her by the shoulders, and shake the truth out of her. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed proof, needed to know for sure before I confronted her. The days that followed were hell. I started paying more attention to every little thing Amelia did. How she'd leave the room to take phone calls. How she'd lock her phone like it was Fort Knox. And the texts, always typing away, but when I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd get defensive, almost angry. Jesus, John, can I not have any privacy? She snapped one night when I asked who was texting her so late. Stop being so goddamn paranoid. Paranoid. That's the word she kept throwing around. But I wasn't paranoid. I was just starting to see things clearly. And it wasn't just about the phone calls and texts. There were other things, like how she'd buy new clothes but never wear them around me. Or how she suddenly cared about how she looked, but only when she was going to work. And every time I tried to bring up our relationship, tried to ask why we never talked, never had sex anymore, she'd twist it around, make it my fault. Maybe if you weren't so needy, we'd have a better relationship, she said once in that cold, dismissive tone she'd perfected. Like I was some kind of pathetic, clingy loser for wanting to be close to my own wife. But the worst part was Lily. She kept her distance from her mom after that day, and every time she looked at Amelia, it was like she couldn't stand to be in the same room. I could see how much it hurt her, knowing her mom was, well, whatever the hell she was doing. And that killed me inside. I wanted to protect Lily, shield her from all this crap, but how could I when I didn't even know the full truth myself? I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let this tear my family apart. But I couldn't let on that I knew either. If I confronted Amelia without solid proof, she'd deny it, twist it around, make me out to be the bad guy, and I'd end up apologizing for things I didn't even do. No, I needed a plan, needed to catch her red-handed. And that's when I decided to talk to my buddy, Gary, the maintenance guy at Lily's school. If anyone could help me get to the bottom of this, it was him, and that's how the real game began. So there I was, sitting in my truck outside the school like some amateur private investigator, my thoughts bouncing between rage and sadness. I couldn't stop replaying Lily's words in my head, couldn't stop thinking about that snake, Mr. Bennett, with his hands all over my wife. And Amelia? Every time she smiled, every laugh that used to make me feel alive. Now all I felt was hate. It was like she was playing some sick joke, a performance that everyone saw except me. I didn't have much time. I needed proof, and I needed it quick, but I didn't know where to start. That's when I called up Gary. Now, Gary's not your average guy. He's a bit rough around the edges, sure, but he's loyal as hell. We'd known each other since high school, played on the same football team, shared more drunken nights and dumb stunts than I could count. And he just so happened to be the head of maintenance at Lily's school. Had keys to every door, access to every room. If anyone could help me get the evidence, it was Gary. Look, man, I said, trying to keep my voice steady over the phone. I need a favor. And before you ask, yeah, it's serious as hell. Shit, John, what's up? You sound like you're about to have a heart attack, he said, concern cutting through his usual laid-back tone. I told him everything. About Lily catching Amelia and Mr. Bennett. About my suspicions, about how my own house felt like a battleground with the enemy sitting at the dinner table. Gary didn't ask too many questions. He just listened. And when I was done, there was a pause, a long one. I thought he was going to tell me I was crazy or to handle my own shit, but instead he said, all right, man, I got your back. Let's catch these bastards. That's how the plan was born. We decided that Gary would install a hidden camera in Mr. Bennett's office. The guy was a creature of habit, always in his classroom after hours, working. And Amelia, with all her work excuses, seemed to have free rein to do whatever she wanted. So I had a hunch that whatever was going on between them was happening there. Gary said he'd placed the camera behind one of the stacks of books on Bennett's shelf, somewhere they'd never see it. While Gary worked on getting the camera set up, I was left to live with the chaos at home. You'd think after hearing what Lily told me, I'd be able to mask my feelings around Amelia, but every word out of her mouth made my blood boil. It was like she knew I was onto her and took pleasure in it. She'd come home later and later with these half-assed excuses like, oh, the traffic was just awful, or I had a last-minute meeting. Sometimes she'd reek of perfume that I knew wasn't hers, the kind you get dressed up for, not the kind you wear to a day at the office. And when I'd question her, she'd either shut down or go straight for the jugular, tearing into me for being overbearing. Why are you so obsessed with where I am all the time? she snapped one night, slamming the bedroom door shut behind her. God, John, it's like living with a jealous teenager. I'm working my ass off to provide for this family, and all you do is nag me like I'm doing something wrong. You sure you're working for the family? I shot back. Or maybe you're working on someone else? I regretted saying it the second it left my mouth, but the damage was done. Amelia's eyes went wide, then narrowed into those hateful slits I was all too familiar with. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She spat, her voice dripping with venom. Are you accusing me of something, John? You seriously think I'd cheat on you? You're out of your goddamn mind. This is exactly why our marriage is falling apart, because you're so insecure, so paranoid. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. She twisted everything like I was some kind of crazed husband imagining things. And she knew how to play her cards right, storming off in a rage, slamming doors, and leaving me sitting there, stewing in my own doubt. Meanwhile, Lily would hide in her room, earbuds in, trying to drown out the shouting. I could see the way she looked at her mom, disgust and sadness mixing in her eyes. My little girl, being forced to witness all this, caught in the middle of a mess she didn't ask for. But even though the tension was unbearable, I had to stay cool. Had to pretend like I was the clueless husband. Every night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the hours until I could check in with Gary. And finally, a few days later, he called me up. Got it set up, man, Gary said over the phone. Just give me a couple days, and I'll get you that footage. You better be ready for whatever you see. And so, the waiting began. Those were the longest days of my life. I was a walking nerve, holding myself together with tape and glue. It felt like Amelia was taunting me at every opportunity. She'd kiss me goodbye in the mornings, telling me to have a great day, but I could feel the hollowness behind it, like she was playing a role she no longer cared for. And every time her phone buzzed, she'd get that sly little smile, the one that used to make me feel special, but now just made me want to smash her phone against the wall. I tried to make small talk, to get her to open up. So, how's work going? You seem really busy lately. I'd say, try to sound casual, trying to fish for any clue. Fine, John, she'd reply curtly, not even looking up from her phone. Same as always. Why do you keep asking? Jesus, you're so boring sometimes. Boring. That's what I'd become to her, I guess. Just the husband who wasn't enough anymore. And the way she looked at me, like I was an inconvenience, made me wonder how long she'd felt that way. Had she ever really loved me? Or was it all just an act from the start? Meanwhile, Lily tried to stay invisible. She'd come home, head straight to her room, and only come out when she needed to eat or grab her backpack for school. I tried to keep things normal for her, tried to be the dad she could lean on, but the look on her face told me she knew things would never be the same. Finally, after days of pretending, of holding my breath every time Amelia left the house, Gary called me back. You need to come over, he said, his voice grim. I've got the footage. I don't remember much about the drive to Gary's place. Just that my hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep the wheel steady. When I got there, he didn't say a word, just handed me the laptop and pressed play. And there it was, Amelia, my wife of 15 years, sitting on Mr. Bennett's desk, her legs wrapped around him as they kissed like teenagers who couldn't keep their hands off each other. And then, as if that wasn't enough to rip my heart out, they disappeared into the supply closet together. I sat there, numb, staring at the screen like it was some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But it was real. Every second of it was real, and there was no denying what I was seeing. I didn't know what to do next. Part of me wanted to storm into the school and confront them both, to tear Mr. Bennett apart with my bare hands, to scream in Amelia's face until she felt just an ounce of the pain she'd put me through. But I couldn't. I knew if I acted now, I'd be the one to lose my temper, lose the upper hand, and maybe even lose my daughter in the process. No, I needed to be smart. I needed a plan, and I needed to take them both down in a way they wouldn't see coming. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about getting proof. This was about revenge. The days after seeing that footage were some of the darkest of my life. There I was trying to go about my daily routine, taking Lily to school, going to work, pretending to smile when Amelia walked in the door, all while knowing that my entire life had been a lie. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those images from the video burned into my mind. Amelia's hands tangled in Mr. Bennet's hair, their lips locked like they couldn't get enough of each other, disappearing into that damn closet. It took everything in me not to explode, not to grab her and force her to admit what she'd done, but I knew I couldn't risk it. Not yet. But revenge? That was the one thing keeping me going. The idea of hitting back, hitting harder than they could ever imagine. That's what got me out of bed in the morning. And for that, I needed allies. I couldn't do it alone, and I wasn't just going to let Amelia walk all over me while playing housewife to the whole world. No, this was war, and I needed to find the one person who had as much to lose as I did, Diana Bennett. Diana, the woman I had only seen a couple of times at PTA meetings and school functions, always with a tired smile, trying to keep up appearances with her douchebag husband. I knew she had kids, 2 of them, actually both younger than Lily, and she was one of those involved moms, always volunteering, always talking to the other parents. But I never really gave her much thought. Now, she was the one person who could help me rip down the whole charade. I didn't know how to approach her at first. How the hell do you tell a woman you barely know that her husband is screwing your wife? But I didn't have a choice. I needed her on my side, and I needed to get the truth out in the open. So, I decided to do it like ripping off a Band-Aid, fast and direct. I found her email through the school's parent directory and sent her a short, simple message. Hi Diana, it's John Harris, Lily's dad. I think we need to talk. It's about your husband and my wife. Can you meet me at the Coffee Bean on Elm Street this Friday? I know this sounds crazy, but it's important. The next few days were torture. Every time Amelia smiled at me, every time she asked how my day was, I had to swallow down the bile rising in my throat. I was civil, for Lily's sake, but I couldn't stand being near her. Even sitting at the same dinner table felt like a performance, like I was some actor in a play I didn't sign up for. And she played her role perfectly. Loving mother, hardworking wife. If you didn't know any better, you'd think we were the ideal family. Friday finally came, and I made up some excuse about having to work late. I told Amelia to pick up Lily from school and that I'd grab something to eat on the way home. She didn't even bat an eye, too busy texting away on her phone to care where I was going. Typical. I got to the coffee shop early and found a table in the corner. I couldn't sit still, couldn't stop tapping my foot. When Diana walked in, I recognized her right away. Tall, dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and there was this look in her eyes, like she already knew something was wrong. She spotted me and walked over, her face pale. "John," she asked, her voice small but steady. "Yeah, thanks for meeting me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I motioned for her to sit, and she did, nervously clutching her purse. "So, what's this about?" she asked, glancing around like she expected someone to jump out and yell, "Surprise!" I couldn't blame her. Who wouldn't be on edge after getting a message like mine? "I'll just get to the point," I said, leaning forward. "I have reason to believe your husband, Mr. Bennett, is having an affair with my wife, Amelia." Her face went blank for a moment, like she couldn't comprehend what I'd just said. And then it crumpled, her lips trembling. I don't know what to say. "Are you sure? I mean, do you have proof?" I didn't say anything. I just opened my laptop, clicked on the file, and turned it around so she could see the video. I could see her go pale as it played, her hand covering her mouth, and her eyes glued to the screen. There was no denying it. It was all right there. And when it was over, she just sat there, staring blankly at the table. I suspected for a long time. She finally whispered, tears pooling in her eyes, but not falling. "But I never had proof. I thought maybe it was all in my head, that he was just, I don't know, tired from work," or her voice trailed off. And for a moment, we just sat there in silence. 2 people who'd been lied to, who had their lives ripped apart by 2 people they thought they knew. And in that moment, there was this unspoken understanding between us. a bond made of anger, betrayal, and a shared desire for revenge. "He's done this before, you know," Diana finally said, her voice stronger now, steadier. "Your wife isn't the first. I've caught glimpses, text messages from other women, but he always found a way to explain it away. And I let him. God, I was so stupid." "You're not stupid," I said, trying to offer some comfort. "I mean, look at me. I've been in the dark for who knows how long. But now we know. And I think we need to do something about it." She looked up at me, wiping away a tear, her expression hardening. "Yeah, you're right. We can't just let them get away with this." And that's how it started. We sat there for hours, talking about everything. Our marriages, the lies we'd been told, the people we thought we married. We traded stories, pain, resentment, and everything in between. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. I wasn't just some guy being taken for a fool. And Diana? She wasn't just some poor wife clinging to a cheating husband. We were in this together, and we were going to make them pay. "So, what's the plan?" she finally asked, leaning forward, her eyes meeting mine. And in that moment, I saw the determination in her face, the same determination I felt, the same need to make things right. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But whatever it is, we're going to make sure they regret every second of what they've done." We threw around ideas, exposing them to the school board, sending the video to the parents, posting it online to publicly shame them. The ideas were wild, and we didn't hold back, letting our anger fuel the plans we imagined. And there was a thrill in it, a kind of adrenaline rush that made me feel alive again, like I finally had a purpose beyond being the clueless husband. Eventually, we decided to meet again to finalize our plan. Diana offered to host, saying her house would be more private, less likely to raise suspicion. And as I walked back to my truck that night, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. I knew there was no going back, no unseeing what I'd seen, no undoing what I was about to do. But I also knew that for the first time, I was doing something for myself, for Lily, for the life that Amelia had taken from me. And as for Amelia, she had no idea what was coming. And neither did Mr. Bennett. After that meeting with Diana, I felt like I was in a haze, like I was balancing on a tightrope between fury and desperation. But one thing was crystal clear. I wasn't going to let Amelia and Mr. Bennett get away with this. We were going to expose them, ruin their lives just like they'd ruined ours. And with Diana as my unexpected ally, I actually felt like I had a shot at pulling it off. She was sharp, calculating, and driven by the same fire for revenge that was burning me up inside. We kept in close contact over the next week, texting back and forth, bouncing ideas around like we were plotting some great heist. I had to be careful. Amelia was always nosy, always asking questions when I was on my phone. "Who are you talking to?" she'd probe, her eyes narrowing in suspicion, as if I was the one hiding something. I had to lie through my teeth, making up excuses, sometimes telling her I was talking to Gary about some work project. She'd huff, roll her eyes, and go back to her own world. The world she'd created where I was the sucker, and she was in control. Little did she know that her world was about to collapse. Diana and I agreed to meet at her house on a Thursday evening. She told me she'd sent her kids to stay with her parents for a few days, saying she needed some space to figure things out. Bennett, being the piece of crap that he was, didn't even seem to care. He probably thought he was getting a free pass to keep banging Amelia without his wife around to ask questions. The thought made me want to vomit, but it only fueled my drive to see this plan through. That evening, I made up another excuse to Amelia. Something about having a late meeting with Gary, some project I had to help with at work. She barely looked up from her phone when I told her. "Whatever, John. Just don't wake me up when you get home." Cold. Indifferent. Like I was nothing more than an afterthought. It hurt, but I stuffed that feeling down. She'd regret that soon enough. When I got to Diana's house, it was different from what I expected. I figured it'd be one of those perfectly tidy suburban homes, but instead, it looked like a bomb had gone off. Dishes piled up in the sink, laundry draped over the couch, signs of a woman who'd been too busy dealing with betrayal to worry about cleaning up. I felt a weird kinship seeing it all, like I wasn't the only one whose life was falling apart. She welcomed me in, poured me a glass of wine, and we sat down at her kitchen table, staring at each other for a moment before the real talk began. "So, have you thought about how far you want to take this?" Diana asked, swirling the wine in her glass. I could see the tension in her face, the anger that simmered just below the surface. "I want them ruined," I said, not even hesitating. "I want to destroy their lives like they've destroyed ours. But we got to be smart about this. I want them to feel it. Both of them." She nodded, eyes hardening with resolve. "Agreed. I've been thinking we send the video to the school board anonymously. Once they see it, there's no way Bennett can talk his way out of it. He'll lose his job, his reputation. And as for Amelia, maybe we send it to her job too? Let her colleagues see what kind of business trips she's been taking." I grinned for the first time in weeks. "Diana, I like the way you think." We went back and forth, brainstorming every possible way to make them suffer. By the second glass of wine, we'd come up with a full-on hit list, emailing the video to the school board, sending it to every parent at Lily's school, posting it anonymously on social media. Each idea felt like another stab at the people who'd torn our lives apart. The more we talked, the more animated we became, like generals planning an all-out war. But as the evening went on, our focus started to shift. The adrenaline from planning our revenge, the anger, the pain, it was all swirling together, mixing with the wine, turning into something different. I don't know when the line got crossed, but at some point, the tension in the room changed. It wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about the two of us, broken and betrayed, finding solace in one another's company. Diana got up to grab another bottle of wine, and I noticed how close she was standing to me, closer than necessary. When she turned to look at me, there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before, a look of understanding, of shared suffering, and maybe just a little bit of desire. And then it happened. I stood up, and before either of us could think twice, we were kissing. Not like a peck on the lips, not like some hesitant first kiss, but a kiss filled with anger, desperation, and need. A kiss that said, "We're in this together." We didn't say a word. There was no need to. One kiss led to another, and before I knew it, we were stumbling into the living room, tearing at each other's clothes. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't tender, it was raw, primal, like two people trying to take back some semblance of control. We ended up on the couch, our hands everywhere, our mouths everywhere. And for the first time in months, I felt alive again. I didn't feel like the pathetic husband, the man left in the dark. I felt powerful, in control. It was reckless, and maybe it was wrong, but in that moment, it felt right. And when it was over, we lay there, catching our breath, staring up at the ceiling. I half expected to feel guilty, to regret what we'd done, but I didn't. Not one bit. If anything, I felt liberated, like I'd taken back a piece of myself that Amelia had stolen. "Wow," Diana whispered, finally breaking the silence. "I didn't see that coming." "Neither did I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "But I don't regret it." "Neither do I," she said, looking over at me with that same fierce determination. "In this, it changes nothing. They still deserve everything that's coming to them." I nodded, and we sat up, putting our clothes back on, trying to regain some composure. It was almost midnight by the time I left, and as I drove home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I knew what I'd done was complicated, but in a way, it felt like a turning point. Like I was no longer just a victim, but a man fighting back, reclaiming my life one step at a time. When I got home, the house was dark. Amelia was asleep, or at least pretending to be. I slipped into bed beside her, and the smell of her perfume hit me like a slap in the face. The same perfume she wore the night Lily caught her with Bennett. But for the first time, I didn't feel sick. I didn't feel like crying or screaming. I just felt ready to put the plan in motion, ready to watch Amelia's world burn. and I knew Diana felt the same way. We were in this together, and there was no turning back now. The next morning, waking up next to Amelia felt like waking up next to a stranger. She lay there, peaceful, like she didn't have a single care in the world. I stared at her for a long minute, trying to remember the woman I once loved, the woman who promised to be my partner for life. But all I saw was a liar, a manipulator, and a woman who was about to have her entire world ripped apart. And it was long overdue. The plan with Diana was simple but brutal. We decided to start with the school. After all, the affair had bloomed in its classrooms, tainting the very place where our kids went to learn. Diana and I spent hours drafting up the emails, creating fake accounts to send them from so they couldn't be traced back to us. Each email had the subject line, urgent, ethical violation by a school teacher. And attached was the video, those damning few minutes of passion between Amelia and Mr. Bennett. Watching it again and again was like sticking a knife into my chest, but I knew it had to be done. As we clicked send on the last email, I felt this rush of anticipation, a mix of nerves and adrenaline. It was like waiting for a bomb to go off, knowing the explosion was going to change everything. The fallout was immediate. By lunchtime, Diana's phone was blowing up with messages from other parents. Some were shocked, some furious, but all of them disgusted by what they'd seen. By the time school let out that day, Mr. Bennett's reputation was already in shreds. He didn't show up to teach his last class. He'd been called into a meeting with the school board, his career hanging by a thread. I couldn't help but imagine the look on his face as they confronted him, the panic and fear of a man who thought he'd never get caught. That evening, Amelia came home, as usual, playing the part of the doting wife. But I noticed how she was on edge, how she kept checking her phone every few minutes, her fingers trembling as she typed. It didn't take long for her to crack. By the time I'd finished dinner, she came into the living room, phone in hand, and her face was white as a sheet. "John," she started, her voice barely a whisper. We need to talk." I didn't look up from the TV. "About what?" I said, pretending like I didn't know exactly what was coming. "There's something happened at school today," she stammered. "Mr. Bennett, there's a video going around and people are saying they're saying awful things. But it's not true, John. You have to believe me. It's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like." I cut her off, my voice cold as ice. I stood up, towering over her as the weight of her lies hung between us like a brick wall. "Because it looks like you've been screwing our daughter's history teacher in a damn classroom, Amelia." Her face crumpled, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. "Please, just let me explain." "Explain what?" I shouted, unable to keep my composure any longer. "That you're a liar? A cheater? That you've been throwing away our marriage for some scumbag who can't even keep his dick in his pants around the kids he's supposed to be teaching." "I didn't mean for this to happen," she cried, collapsing onto the couch. I was lonely, John. I felt like you didn't love me anymore, and I made a mistake. But it didn't mean anything, I swear to you. Didn't mean anything? I repeated, the words leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. You broke our family, Amelia. You broke Lily's trust. You broke my trust, and you want to sit here and tell me it didn't mean anything? It meant everything. And now, you're going to pay for it. I stormed out of the room, leaving her there in a mess of sobs and excuses. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I went to Lily's room, and there she was, my little girl, sitting on her bed with her sketchbook in her lap, trying to pretend like she hadn't heard everything. But I could see the pain in her eyes, the betrayal, the confusion. I sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into me, burying her face in my chest. I'm so sorry, Lily, I whispered, holding her tight. I'm so sorry you have to go through this. I just want it to stop, she said, her voice muffled against my shirt. I just want things to go back to how they were. I wished I could make that happen for her, but I knew there was no going back. There was only moving forward, and that meant getting Amelia out of our lives for good. The next day, Diana and I set phase 2 of our plan into motion. She sent the video to the parents at the school, and I contacted my lawyer, Paul, to get the divorce papers drawn up. Paul was a no-nonsense guy, straight to the point, and he assured me that given Amelia's infidelity, I'd have a strong case for full custody of Lily. And with Amelia's reputation in tatters, it was going to be hard for her to argue otherwise. While the legal process began to unfold, the scandal at school reached its peak. Mr. Bennett was formally fired, his teaching license revoked, and he became the talk of the town. There were whispers about him everywhere, and he and Amelia became pariahs in the community. Amelia tried to go to work, but the stares, the whispers behind her back, the knowing glances, it became too much for her to handle. She eventually quit her job, saying she needed space to think. But I knew the truth. She was hiding from her own shame. Meanwhile, Diana and I stayed close. We'd meet up to talk about the divorce proceedings, about our kids, about life after the storm we created. There was a comfort in being around her, like we were two survivors of the same shipwreck, trying to figure out how to navigate our new lives. And we fell into a kind of routine, talking late into the night, sharing our fears and hopes, and slowly, the anger and pain started to fade, replaced by something softer, something I hadn't felt in a long time. And then came the court hearings. Amelia tried to put on a show of remorse, saying she was willing to do anything to repair her relationship with Lily. But it was all just words. Even Lily could see through it, refusing to speak to her during the proceedings, refusing to be in the same room as her mother. When the final verdict was delivered, granting me full custody, Amelia broke down in tears, pleading with me to give her another chance, to let her back into our lives. But I knew better. I'd seen who she really was, and there was no coming back from that. The day the divorce was finalized was like shedding a heavy coat I'd been wearing for too long. I was free. Lily and I were free. We packed up our things and moved to a new house, a smaller place across town, but one that felt like a fresh start, a place without the ghosts of Amelia's lies lurking in every corner. In the weeks that followed, I focused on Lily. We took up new hobbies, hiking gun art classes together, playing board games every Friday night. I watched as she slowly started to come back to life, her laughter returning, the light in her eyes brightening. She picked up drawing again, filling her sketchbooks with doodles and dreams, letting her emotions flow through her pencil. And then there was Sarah. She was a single mom I met at one of Lily's art classes. We started talking, first about our kids, then about our lives, and it didn't take long for us to find common ground. She'd been through a rough divorce too, had her own battle scars, and we'd share our stories over coffee while the kids painted and laughed. There was no rush, no pressure, just two people figuring out how to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt happy, whole, like I was finally living life on my own terms. Amelia still tries to reach out sometimes, leaving voicemails and sending texts, saying she wants to see Lily, that she wants to make amends. But Lily's not ready, and I don't know if she ever will be. And honestly, I don't blame her. Sometimes there are wounds that time just doesn't heal, and maybe that's okay. Looking back now, I realize that what happened wasn't just an end. It was a beginning. It was the start of a new life. A life where I finally learned what it meant to stand up for myself, to fight for my happiness, and to protect the people I love. It wasn't easy, and it sure as hell wasn't pretty, but I wouldn't change it. Not for anything. Because at the end of the day, Amelia and Mr. Bennett didn't win. They lost everything. And me? I found something better. I found myself, and I found the strength to start over. And that's the sweetest revenge of all.